Anthony, building on what Danny and Tamara have shared, could you give us a little insight to your father?
I mean, what I'll do is just pick up that for a second, because there is a recording of my mother giving a talk, and it's difficult for me to watch because I see her there. Any of you who've had that similar experience with recordings of parents and grandparents will know what I mean, because they're suddenly there. And my mother starts in she had quite a strong accent, which of course you don't realize as a child, and you realize then as an adult when listening to it. She said, here I am, I'm part of the history syllabus. That seems very strange to me, to be part of the history syllabus, and that was that both captured her sense of the ridiculous,
yes, exactly,
and something quite profoundly, which has proved to be quite profoundly. You asked me to talk about my father, and I was contemplating doing this, and has been evident in the earlier discussion. It's quite difficult to describe people to whom you are in intimate relation. You know the famous thing where which men are always accused of doing, which is failing to notice the change in their wife's hairstyle or something like that. That's because they're not actually. You relate to them in a different way, see them in a different way. You can't maintain a degree of objectivity. And even now, though I was so close to my father and my mother, I find it quite difficult to conjure them to mind. They're sort of so integrated in who you are and how you experience the world, that to call them to mind in order to describe is that Daniel was able to do that in the book is something, to me still quite astonishing.
Well, it's interesting because in the book I have to actually give everyone their first name. You can't go through it going mum and dad. And I had a whole lot of stuff. One interesting little thing I had a problem with about naming is that my grandfather on my father's side, his name is Adolf. And so I didn't know whether to call him Adolf all the way through the book. Right. And then I said no, because he was called Dolu by his friends. So I thought, I'll use Dolu. And then I thought, no, I'm not going to let Hitler steal his name, right? I'm going to call him Adolf. But in the end, one of them being called Adolf and the other one being called Alfred was too confusing, so I did actually use Dolu. But it is odd calling your own dad Ludwig. I don't know about the two of you, but I always used to be completely freaked out if you ever went to someone's house with a contemporary and they start calling their dad Eric or something. I find that awful. But that's just innate conservatism.
So I would say I'm trying to pick out three things that I would pick out of my father. So I'm going to say something about his Polishness, something about his Jewishness, and something about his being an engineer. I'll start with that because it's sort of closest to me. I'm in the unusual position, maybe not that unusual, in the sense that I shared a professional relationship with my father. He was my mentor. He was my. He had, nature or nurture. Who knows? Admiration. I don't know. His work and mine were quite close to each other, and so the snapshot that I want to recall is my father, dying, and he's in a hospice. He knows he's going to die, and to the extent that anybody can do, he has made his peace with that. He was enough of a scientist, I think, to have made to have rationalized it, and he decides that we are going to discuss the relationship between instrument science and computer science. That is the matter of most moment, which he feels that he and I should talk about. And so somewhere, those of you who are sad enough to peruse the annals of the Journal of Measurement will find a joint paper which subtitled The Last Conversation, which is the paper produced in the last few weeks of my father's life, where he and of course quite interesting working with your father, because on the one hand you have all of that common hinterland. On the other hand, I forgot to return my library books when aged 10, which casts some doubt upon my overall competence. And so anyway, so that's the first snapshot. The second is my father's Jewishness, and it's quite strange. We had a Jewish upbringing in a rather individual style in some ways. Like all of these things, everybody treats their own family as sort of normal. It's sort of, that's of course, it's only when you get married that you realize actually your own family is far from normal. My wife found some of the things, the fact that Finkelsteins discuss politics at breakfast, I thought was completely extraordinary and unacceptable.
How many, we genuinely had a conversation on Shabbat once about how many cans of drink you could fit into a fridge of a particular cubic volume. Mum was really obsessed with that, and then how much space there'd be between them. And it went on, that conversation.
Do you remember the conclusion?
Several. But it was just, we had
could have named a number there, we could have been fine. I sort of then come to realize that my father had invented his Jewishness.
Yeah.
That he'd had,
although very reliant on Alfred as well.
Yeah, very reliant on sort of from that sort of German Jewish liberal foundation, he'd reinvented it. And so only after a while did I understand that it was some sort of interpretation of a pre-war Jewish liberal conservative experience, but it had been constructed. And the last is, my father was fiercely patriotic, fiercely committed to the United Kingdom. My own work in national security bears a little bit of the hallmarks of that, fiercely committed to the defense of democratic values and the realization that sometimes, that takes, that requires fighting for in all the ways that one had. And I suddenly then come to the thing that my father was British in the way that only a Pole could be. That his patriotism and his outlook and his view of the world was deeply and profoundly Polish.
Yeah, that's right.
And again, I came to that realization late. So I'm an engineer, a Jew and a Pole. Yeah.
I think it probably is worth saying in terms of the Jewish thing. He created an extraordinary Jewish life for us that we experience and feel very committed to. He also was very intellectually interested in his Judaism. And when he retired, he did a PhD on a particularly few number of years of in the
Warsaw Jewish Seminary.
Polish
Progressive Rabbis of Warsaw of the 19th century.
Yeah, there you go. He
was.
wrote the book. And did the first PhD that Leobeck College ever gave, because, that's what you do when you've got a bit of spare time.
The only reason I can remember that so fluently is because on several occasions, in the Times, I've tried to explain why I was interested in football, but he was not interested in football because his hobby was the Progressive Rabbis of Warsaw of the 19th century.
The irony was, later on in his PhD, I went visited them at home, and there he was, sitting at the table, complaining about the fact that his supervisor wasn't reading his drafts, and that he didn't know why he'd chosen such a narrow subject. But to go, Dad, you've supervised 200 PhD students yourself. Sort of get a grip.
During that period where Dad was dying, he did like loads. First of all, he did loads of corrections of his PhD that he was interested in, and then the other thing. He started on about the history of City University, and eventually you went, Dad, you are not dying and leaving me with the history of the City University to write, which was extremely funny. But then you actually, as you became president of City University, he did die and leave you with the responsibility for.
What can I say?